It's nice knowing how every stage ends, but that's not living.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in episode 4 of X-Men 97. So this episode uses an old Saturday morning cartoon structure that the original series never employed. This is actually 2 stories in one episode. The old series favored larger stories told over multiple episodes, and of course, the second story in this episode, Life Death, sets up a longer arc for Storm and for the X-Men. A longer arc that, believe me, goes to some weird places in the comics I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. But I did love how both stories were about letting go of the past, just, told through different eyes. And before we get rolling, I want to remind you, we have these great X parody designs at our merch store. We have the team as the Breakfast Club, X-Men Nighthawks, and Doug as Wolverine. X-Men Nighthawks is also available on a wide variety of different kinds of merch. Shopping our merch store really does help us out, guys. We love designing these shirts for you, and thanks for watching. Now, the episode starts with Jubilee doing the Previously On.
Previously on X-Men.
Much like the later season intros of the show Growing Pains, this changing of the opening is to focus on whatever character is going to have focus in this episode. In this case, it's about Jubilee putting away childish things and hooking up with a boy. Every episode so far has swapped out some of the intro footage for appropriate recreations of original series events. In this case, it's Jubilee facing off against Mojo in the Season 3 episode Long Shot.
Yeah, what is going on with all the Mojo stuff? He was in the original show?
Right, so just in case, like Doug, you were not alive in the 90s, I'm going to give you a very brief recap of the original Mojo episodes from the original series. So Mojo lives in another dimension where he basically puts on interdimensional cable like in Rick and Morty.
The moon, it comes crashing into Earth, and what do you do then? It's 2 brothers and it's called 2 Brothers.
His number 1 star is a hero named Longshot who has the power of incredible luck, hollow bones, and the ability to see possible futures. When Longshot goes on strike, Mojo brings in the X-Men to star in a series of shows from different genres. Longshot ends up freeing the X-Men so he can have back his original time slot. Now, Mojo is a great villain for this show because he is the ultimate parody of a Saturday morning cartoon producer.
Got something? I'm losing my audience to a bunch of dead trees!
He would actually be a great villain for the movies, especially Deadpool. I think Nando V Movies did a great video on that for Deadpool 3. Maybe someday we'll see that. In the Season 3 episode, Longshot is leading a revolution against Mojo, and then he comes to Earth where he befriends Jubilee. She develops a crush on him, and Mojo comes to Earth to try to kill the X-Men. But when they have him on the ropes, he cancels his own show and returns to his home dimension. That episode was pivotal because it showed Jubilee taking center stage in a story and developing romantic feelings for a boy, both of which are paid off in this episode. So, the shot of Jubilee facing Mojo in the opening credits is from that episode I just talked about.
Kneel, puny mortals, before the might of Magneto!
My God, what are you wearing? Give me that.
Oh, geez, now my secret's out. You can see that I'm bald as my frenemy, Charles Xavier.
Dude, you're not bald, you're just losing your hair. And if your hair is thinning, don't worry. You can actually do something about it with Keeps. They're the sponsor of this video. You guys won't believe how many guys start losing their hair but then put off doing something about it.
Wow, does Keeps actually work?
Yes. Now, I have been using Keeps for years, and if it weren't for Keeps, I would have lost my hair years ago.
So you really use Keeps?
I sure do, and what I like most about Keeps is that it's convenient, delivered straight to my front door, and I don't have to go through the hassle of making appointments and waiting in line at some office. Instead, I get a personalized plan from a licensed medical provider without even leaving my home. I can even message the medical provider at any time via their secure messaging portal. Keeps offers both of the FDA-approved hair loss treatment options, as well as a 2-in-1 option that combines both treatments. In fact, most Keeps customers see results within 6 months of starting treatment, so it's important to act fast, and you have to start early and stick with it. The sooner you start using Keeps, the more hair you'll save. Keeps stopped my hair loss right in its tracks, and they have helped nearly 1 million men like us with only science-backed ingredients. That's why Keeps has more than 5,000 5-star reviews. Over the last 6 years, Keeps has treated over 1 million men. So, if you're noticing that you're losing your hair, guys, don't ignore it or hope it goes away. Do something about it right now, because hair loss stops with Keeps. Thanks again, Keeps, for sponsoring this video and for the free product. For a special offer to get started, go to keeps.com/ScreenCrush or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/ScreenCrush. Now, back to the opening credits. We do also see Forge from the episode Cold Comfort. So, We've seen Forge in a few episodes in the original series. Usually, we saw a future version of him who invented the time travel device that sent Bishop back into the past. Speaking of Bishop, he is no longer in the opening credits, so I guess his main purpose in the show was to stick around until baby Nate had to go into the future. But we do see present-day Forge a couple times in the original show. First, in that episode Cold Comfort, where he reveals to the X-Men that he is leading a government superhero team called X-Factor, who we do see a photo of later in this episode right here. And by the way, I appreciate how they're drawn just like they were by Larry Stroman in that original comic. As I pointed out last week, he and Xavier gave no indication that they knew each other in that episode.
Why did you attack us?
You broke into our training camp.
But in this episode, Forge makes it known that they are indeed old friends.
I owe that fellow a great deal.
And Forge was also a key character in the Phalanx two-parter where he helps Beast to stop an alien invasion. You know, the episode where Morlock becomes his leg. And we also see a shot of Xavier listening in on the Hellfire Club, the Illuminati group of supervillain mutants who were responsible for unleashing Dark Phoenix in Season 3. We also saw them hinted at in this newspaper from Episode 1 talking about the Hellfire Gala. Now their load-in screen is the wall from the classic cover of X-Men 141, Days of the Future Past, where Wolverine is in front of a wall of murder mutants. And actually, the wall aligns right with the comics. We have Cyclops, Colossus, Storm, Nightcrawler, Angel, Iceman, Beast, Kitty Pryde, Magneto, Quicksilver, Jean, Wolverine, I'm guessing Rogue down here, Polaris, Havoc, and Banshee. And then they fight Sentinels like in Jubilee's first adventure because remember, she's reliving her glory days with the X-Men. Just as we, the audience, are reliving our glory days of watching the original series on Saturday mornings. This is what she considers to be the definitive version of the team, just like for how many of you watching this version of the X-Men are the X-Men to you. But the whole point of this team is that people do grow, evolve, and outgrow the team to make room for a new generation of mutants. This is what Claremont was famous for during his run, always keeping the team evolving. And then we see 16-bit versions of them fighting on a 4x3 classic arcade cabinet. They go to the Savage Land to fight Sauron, who turns into plain old Carl Lycos when he's defeated, just like he does in the original show.
You are safe now, Carl Lycos.
And then they go to Asteroid M, Magneto's orbital base that was meant to be a haven for mutants in Season 4. This is also where you fought Magneto as the final boss in the X-Men arcade game. However, the fight in the episode is much cooler than in the original game, where, like I said, you walk around and kick-punch Magneto. Now, the episode begins with the team trying to make plans for Jubilee's birthday. I love how this season is leaving a lot of character conflicts kind of simmer in every episode. Like how Gambit is jealous of Magneto and Rogue, so he's trying to dote on her, but the boss has already given her sugar.
It's 3 sugars.
I'll take a cappuccino if you just taking orders.
No.
Beast says,
"The youngest member deserves some jubilation on her 18th birthday."
And jubilation is actually her full name, and also it means celebration. Very good, Beast. Very good. Wolverine is wearing his yellow flannel shirt from the original series, but in the original show, he always wore it with a brown leather jacket. It's weird seeing him in just the shirt. I guess I just long for things to be the way they were, to permanently live in my childhood.
Luckily, this episode has some important life lessons to teach you.
That's right. Magneto casually drops in that his entire family was murdered by Nazis.
My parents perished when I was a child.
An event that we saw dramatized in the first scene in the original X-Men, but is also a key story in the character's development from the comics. So, Jubilee has turned 18. She is no longer the teen kid sidekick of the X-Men. She is a grown woman. So, it's fitting that this episode is about letting go of the past and learning to grow up. She casually mentions that Scott and Jean are at the UN.
They aren't even here because they just had to go play mutant politics at the United Nations.
Which, from a writer's standpoint, was a smart move. The last episode ended with Scott and Jean's child gone and they're in a broken home. They're not even sure if they're actually married. It's probably best to kick that can down the road to the next episode. They are at the UN because the mutant nation of Genosha is being admitted as a member nation. Now, this is a huge deal from the comics. Genosha began as a mutant slave state, which was partially liberated in the comics crossover extinction agenda. I think those comics are going to be adapted in the final arc of this season, so I'm not going to go into that right now. I will say, though, that in the original series, Genosha was a slave state that was liberated by Magneto in Season 3. And in Season 5, we saw Geonosian mutants rally to him in the final episode. So this storyline is a natural continuation of what we saw in the original series. The console in Jubilee's room looks like a 16-bit Sega Genesis, and the cartridge even looks like the X-Men Sega game that I always wanted to play when I was a kid, but that we could never afford. That game, like the classic X-Men arcade game, featured Magneto as the final boss. So Mojo reaches out to them through the game, just like how he captured the X-Men for his TV show through TV screens in the original episode. And notice we hear this sound. You young whippersnappers may not know this, but that is the sound of a phone line modem connecting to the internet. Yes, there was a time, for years, where every single time you wanted to use the internet for anything, you had to listen to that sound and wait for a few minutes.
Okay, great. Wow.
When Jubilee and Roberto enter Mojo World, notice how the glitching looks like how an old cartridge game would glitch. Super frustrating, reliving that memory. And this is also foreshadowing the older version of Jubilee, who is like a glitch in the Matrix herself, but more on that later. Roberto is afraid to use his powers because he's afraid that word of that would get back to his mother. Now, this tracks with how he originally behaved in the comics, where he very much acts like his powers are a curse and not a gift. And he's always worried how his actions will affect the status of his wealthy family. The two of them are chased by the Friends of Humanity thugs with arm cannons like we saw in episode 1 this season. And then they see this phone ringing in a phone booth, the first of many references to The Matrix, the classic 1999 film where humanity is hooked up to a virtual simulation similar to what Jubilee is going through in this episode. In that movie, people who hack into the Matrix are released by phone calls. So all of this is calling back to that iconic original scene. Then we're taking through the greatest hits of Jubilee moments, starting with her enslavement of Genosha in Season 1. We see Blob and Sunfire performing the exact same task they did in that episode. Now there's a subtle connection here to the second part episode, Life Death. The Geonosians used control collars to neutralize mutant powers. These same collars were used to make the Executioner's gun, and it turns out that Forge had a hand in inventing this technology. But there's another connection here to Apocalypse and Baby Nate that I'm going to talk about a little later in the video.
Devices that could be used to neutralize dangerous mutants.
So then, after Hot Topic Stalker saves them, they're sent into Mojo's arena just like the X-Men were back in Season 2. We see the X-Men's greatest hits, with Wolverine fighting the same villains he did in that episode. Mojo also got a redesign. He's skinnier, much like his reincarnation Mojo 2 from the comics. And I appreciate how now he does not blink. That always bothered me in the original show. Mojo is supposed to have these wires holding open his eyes, like Alex in A Clockwork Orange. The idea is that he always wants to keep your eyes peeled watching TV. He says,
Dazzler had a gig, don't ask.
Now, there's maybe a weird continuity error here. Dazzler is a mutant pop star with the power to turn sound into light. This is her in X-Men Apocalypse. In the comics, she joined the X-Men about the same time as Longshot, and they became an item, eventually returning to Mojo World together. But she had a brief cameo in the original Mojo episode in Season 2. But then, she was an actual side character in the Dark Phoenix saga between a love triangle between Scott and Jean, where she didn't seem to have any connection to that life in Mojo World.
No!
I guess she was in Mojo World and then hit up the club scene in New York and then went back into Mojo World.
I guess you're right. Now we get another Matrix callback with this line.
If you die in the game, you die in real life.
You're killed in the Matrix. You die here.
And then we see Mojo running through the life of the current X-Men, but framed through old TV shows. There's Who's the Boss to show how the new leadership has taken over, a spoof of A Different World to show the team isn't like she remembered, and Divorce Court to show that Scott and Jean might be splitting up. Mojo is making the case for Jubilee that as she gets older, her life changes and gets more complicated. And wouldn't she rather just be a kid, playing video games to relive her glory days over and over? Remember, when we first met Jubilee in the pilot, her favorite form of escape was going to the arcade, like she suggests doing for her party at the beginning of this episode.
Hey, you! Do you know how much that game costs?
Yeah, a quarter.
And then the game starts with a 16-bit version of Magneto, much like the version that opened the classic X-Men arcade game and the X-Men Sega game. Now that cabinet game is fondly remembered, but very annoying because you lost energy every time you used your powers, so like Storm just had to like kick and punch her enemies. Roberto starts to flash because he's dying, just like characters who are about to die in vintage video games. Could also be like there's a countdown to his final death as the game is waiting for you to put in a final quarter. And then we meet their savior, Abscissa. Now this is a mathematical term that means the center point on an x-axis. X like the X-Men, but also like a crossroads, just as Jubilee is entering a crossroads on her 18th birthday. Now this character is actually lifted straight from the comics. Just like in the show, she was an older version of Jubilee from an alternate Earth where she serves Mojo. I loved this twist. It is so fitting that on Jubilee's 18th birthday, she is forced to let go of her past, to let go of childish things, and meet her older self. This is making a statement about the dangers of nostalgia and the importance of letting go. It's like the writers are talking to us and saying, look, we know you love the original show, so do we, but we're going to be a little different and move this team forward. To that point, Abscissa is voiced by Allison Court, the original voice of Jubilee who stepped aside so an Asian actress, Holly Chow, could take over the role. This is like Allison saying, my time has passed and it's time for a new generation to step in. Having a double version of Jubilee also plays into the idea that there is a glitch in the Matrix. Remember, in the original film, a deja vu was a repeated image, and it was the sign of a glitch. And the final showdown with Mojo was awesome. I love seeing Jubilee slowly evolve, using her powers to throw firework discs and also using them to skate on the ground. Mojo says,
I'll gut you in the reboot.
Funny because this is a reboot of the original show, and this character Mojo was always all about brushing right up against that fourth wall.
How meta can you get?
And right here you can see an original X-Men arcade cabinet, but this is not actually like the X-Men arcade machine. That one featured Cyclops from the John Byrne design, and this one is the famous Jim Lee design that we know from the show. And that brings us to Life Death Part 1. Now this is adapting one of the greatest all-time classic issues from the comic. Now in the previous issue, a gun that Forge invented takes away Storm's powers. He saves her from drowning and then takes him back to his penthouse, which is filled with this holographic imagery. Now this was such a landmark issue because it mostly stopped the ongoing story to just focus on Storm, feeling depressed and suicidal after losing her powers. It features large panels with no dialogue, which was definitely not the style at the time. There are many similarities between the comic and the episode that I'm going to mention as we go along. For instance, she is wearing these bib overalls like she does in the comic. Now originally she dressed in a frilly gown to impress Forge, but then she felt uncomfortable so she switched back. This was also reflecting Storm's current arc in the comics and in this show. She was always so regal and kept her emotions reined in.
But unlike you, I must keep my emotions in check, lest my powers rage out of control.
But then, especially after she lost her powers, she let go of her emotions and started dressing like a punk with a mohawk. Just like in the comic, Forge makes her dinner and he tells her about his time in the war.
I was a soldier. There was a war.
Now, in the comics, he fought in Vietnam, which, if it was true here, would place him in his mid-40s in the show. This experience in the war didn't just cost him a leg and a hand, it also opened the door for the villain, the Adversary, that's teased at the end of this episode.
Yeah, who is that?
I'll explain a little bit later, but believe me, it gets weird. And I kind of hope they adapt a lot of that for this show. So then they go horseback riding, and Storm does that City of Angels thing, and just like Meg Ryan's stupid character in that movie, she almost dies. But, you know, it does make sense that Storm would become lost in this moment. This is probably the closest she's felt to flying since she lost her powers.
I'll take riding over flying any day.
At your pace, Rogue, I'm surprised you can tell the difference.
She can't command the breeze, but she can at least feel it on her skin. Now, like I mentioned earlier, in the comics, they spend the entire issue in Forge's penthouse where he creates holographic projections of nature. She even feels uneasy by heights and open places since she can no longer fly. Now, I do wonder if that's what's also happening here. Like maybe she was never even on a ranch and she spent the entire episode inside of a holographic simulation. It would explain that ending and the introduction of the Adversary, but like I said, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. So let's just assume that this is not a holographic projection. Storm going to a ranch is a way for her to re-embrace nature without feeling the need to command nature. She may not be able to feel the natural world, but she's getting more attuned to observing it.
That owl, I've seen him before circling. Perhaps he is like the winds.
In Forge's office, we see the aforementioned photo of X-Factor with Magneto, Son, Quicksilver, Forge, Havoc, Polaris, Strong Guy, Wolvesbane, and Multiple Man. And remember, the X-Men sparred with this team in the episode Cold Comfort.
Hate to bust up the therapy session, but your hour is up.
Forge tries to fix Storm, but his first attempt fails, just like it does in the comics. The incantation she uses outside is also similar to how we first saw her use her powers in the original episode.
Winds, heed my command.
Mistress of the elements commands you to release that child.
And again, this is drawing a crucial similarity between the episode's two stories. Both Jubilee and Storm are trying to relive the glory days of the original show, but have to learn to evolve and grow. And after all, that's what a mutation is. Evolving and growth.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
On Forge's bulletin board, we can see the year X93, the year that X-Men debuted in X-Men issue 1. And there is also a spiral in the form of a golden spiral, a form in nature that is often used to promote the theory of intelligent design. There's also a best pancake recipe here, calling back to the pancakes that he made for breakfast in the original Life Death comic book. Now, I mentioned this X-Factor photo, but look at this picture. That's Forge with Dr. Adler.
Who's that?
Dr. Adler was a scientist who was renting a lab on Muir Island, the home of Xavier's ex-girlfriend, the scientist Moira McTaggart. Now, Adler was developing a mutant cure to take away a mutant's powers. There was a whole storyline where Rogue almost got the cure. So in this episode, we learned that Adler's technology was actually adapted from Forge's original designs.
You made these?
No, a scientist in Scotland did.
But I should note here that we never saw the real Dr. Adler in the original show. We saw Mystique posing as Adler when she was working for Apocalypse. Seemingly, Mystique killed and replaced Adler before he could invent a cure, because Apocalypse then replaced his equipment with a machine that would augment a mutant's powers and then make him his slaves. And this is what happened to Archangel in the episode Come the Apocalypse.
must be my slave.
Apocalypse originally developed the virus that Baby Nate contracts in the comics, so I'm wondering if he could end up being the secret villain this season, the guy who's behind Mr. Sinister. But there's actually an even more devious villain in this photo who they're careful to cover up. This person next to Forge is the X-Men villain Bastion, aka Sebastian Gilberti. Now Bastion was the leader of Operation Zero Tolerance, a comic event where the government employed Sentinels to hunt down and kill all mutants. Now Bastion is actually not a human. He was secretly a combination of the mind of Master Mold and the advanced mutant Nimrod, who we did see in the Days of the Future Past episodes. So why is Forge in this photo with Bastion? Well, this is implying that Forge also had a hand in creating the original Sentinel technology.
Man, he's like the Thomas Ridley Jr. of mutant kind.
So Forge having a hand in inventing Sentinels would be bitterly ironic, since we know that he spends his elder years fighting Sentinels in an apocalyptic future. And then Forge lays down a huge bomb.
The Defense Department offered to help me, as long as I helped them build some devices that could be used to neutralize dangerous mutants.
Now, in the comics, the reveal that Forge invented the weapon that stole Storm's powers is a huge gut punch for her. He didn't just create the idea for the tech like he does in the show, he made the actual gun with his own hands, under contract for the government. Just like in the show, he and Storm fall in love in this issue, and he is unable to forgive himself for hurting her. So, after this revelation, she rides out into the plains and falls, just like she does in Forge's penthouse when the holograms disorient her. Except this time, she lands right back in the ranch house, which, like I said, could be a hologram, or this could be demon magic. Because notice when Forge sees this monster, he says right away,
"Get out of my home, you damn demon!"
So how did he know that was a demon?
Well, I'm going to explain what happens in the comics. Just broad strokes, because this is a very long, weird story. In the comics, when Forge's unit was attacked in Vietnam, he invokes a Native American incantation to help him survive. And that brings this spirit called the Adversary into the real world. The Adversary over the years poses as different people in Forge's life. Eventually, the Adversary convinces Storm to assassinate Forge, and the two of them are transported to a kind of alternate Earth where they are alone, like a pocket dimension. So in this world, Forge and Storm fall in love again, and Forge is able to restore Storm's powers. Now meanwhile, while all that's going on, in Dallas, the Adversary takes over Forge's penthouse and it's about to destroy all of reality. So the X-Men attack the Adversary and die, sacrificing their lives on live television. Afterwards, a cosmic being gives them the power to return to life, but keeps their resurrection a secret so they can attack their enemies from hiding. And as part of all this, they can no longer be seen by security cameras. So like, this sets up a really long arc where the X-Mansion was destroyed and the X-Men make their headquarters in Australia and other places, and then for a while, there really was not a functional team. This era coincided with the Inferno story that was adapted in episode 3. Like, it's a bonkers story that they might just be adapting in this show. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing long arcs of this season where the X-Men aren't even a team anymore, where they're broken up, disoriented, or traveling the world away from the X-Mansion. Or there's a total different possibility here. The Adversary is voiced by the same actress who voices Storm, Allison Seeley Smith.
You live disappointed.
I am Storm, mistress of the elements.
In the comic book Life Death Part 2, Storm is in Africa where she's bitten by a venomous snake that causes hallucinations. So we could be seeing a version of that happen here. Or maybe Forge's machine is working, but it's also causing this dormant part of her, the raw mutant power in her mutant genes, to manifest inside of her mind as a demon.
Hey, I just want to say, thanks for the keeps. I got to keep my hair.
That's great, man. And just a reminder to stop your hair loss today, click our link in the description for a special offer from Keeps. So let me know what you think about all this. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.